Hi and welcome, I'm Andy Mioch and you are watching A News. Here's what's making the news right now. The US further raises the tariff rate for China to 125% effective immediately, pauses all other reciprocal tariffs for 90 days. Donald Trump claims that countries are desperate to reach out and make deals with the US. Iran says it's ready for a nuclear deal if the US stops with military threats. Thank you for tuning in. In the latest developments surrounding the global trade, US President Donald Trump said he authorized a 90-day pause on his reciprocal tariffs. However, he raised the tariff rate for China to 125% effective immediately because Beijing retaliated. The US Secretary of Treasury announced that tariff level for imports will be brought down to universal 10% during negotiations with more than 70 countries that sought to talk with Washington.
As I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
Just hours earlier, China announced it is raising tariffs on U.S. goods to 84% starting Thursday, following U.S. President Donald Trump's levy hike, the previous one that brought the total tariff rate on Chinese goods to 104%. Our Mahnur Makhdoom has the details.
The United States has further escalated the trade conflict with China by imposing a 104% tariff on Chinese imports. In a recent development, China's finance ministry announced an 84% tariff on U.S. goods starting Thursday, up from the 34% previously announced. Chinese government's response to these tariffs has been strong-worded, with officials calling these measures unilateral and protectionist.
China firmly opposes and absolutely rejects such domineering and bullying behavior. If the United States truly wants to resolve issues through dialogue and negotiation, it should adopt an attitude of equality, respect, and reciprocity. If the United States ignores the interests of both countries and the international community and insists on waging a tariff war and a trade war, China will fight to the end.
And in response to these intensifying trade barriers, major Chinese brokerage firms, including CITIC Securities and Orient Securities, have announced their commitment to support the domestic financial market. Moreover, more than 100 Chinese companies have announced a share buyback program in an effort to boost investor confidence amid the growing market uncertainty. On the stock market front, the Chinese stock prices have seen an initial dip. However, efforts by brokerages and corporations to stabilize the market may prevent further decline. These developments highlight the deteriorating relationship between US and China. It also raises concern about the economic impact both globally and within the two nations. Mahnur Makhdoom, A News, Beijing, China.
European Union member states have approved a 25% tariff on a wide range of American goods in response to Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the EU. The first out of 3 rounds of tariffs is set to take effect on April 15th.
Member states of the European Union have voted to approve imposing a 25% tariff on US exported products to the EU in retaliation for the Trump administration's announcement to levy tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the EU. All member states, with the exception of Hungary, voted in favour of the retaliatory tariffs, which will cover a wide range of US products, including tobacco, poultry, soybeans, steel and aluminum. The European Union will apply these tariffs in 3 rounds, with the first set to enter into force on the 15th of April. the second phase to kick in from mid-May, and a final round to follow in December. These are Europe's first retaliatory measures in the trade war waged by Donald Trump against his trading partners across the globe. The retaliatory duties on US goods are worth nearly 22 billion euros.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump claims that countries are desperate to reach out to Washington and make a trade deal.
Nearly 70 countries have reached out to the US for trade negotiations. That's according to the White House. It's after President Donald Trump's announcement last week of sweeping 10% tariff on imports, as well as higher reciprocal tariffs targeting major trading partners like China and the European Union. Speaking at a National Republican Congressional Committee dinner on Tuesday evening, Trump claimed nations are desperate to reach agreements.
And don't let some of these politicians go around saying, because I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything, sir. And then I'll see some rebel Republican, some guy that wants to grandstand, say, I think that Congress should take over negotiations. Let me tell you, you don't negotiate like I negotiate. Congress takes over negotiating, sell America fast because you're going to go busted.
He also says the US is collecting nearly $2 billion a day from the tax hikes. Fears of a global recession are growing as the tariffs have wiped trillions of dollars off the value of major firms. Meanwhile, Japan has pledged to work with the G7 and the International Monetary Fund to stabilize markets while European shares and US stock futures continue to face pressure.
Global markets are tumbling following Trump's back and forth with tariffs on dozens of countries, with European and Asian markets bearing the brunt of the impact.
Following the implementation of US President Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs, global stock markets have experienced a significant downturn, with the most pronounced impacts felt in Asia and Europe. European shares dropped sharply on Wednesday as China doubled its tariffs on US goods, following Washington's announcement of a massive 104% levy on Beijing. As US tariffs took effect, Asian markets saw a sharp sell-off, but China defied the trend. The Shanghai Composite rose 1.3%. supported by state-backed measures as China prepared to retaliate against US tariffs. Over 200 companies in China's A-share market announced buybacks and shareholding increases worth 40 billion yuan to stabilize prices and boost investor confidence. However, Japan's Nikkei share average plummeted by 3.9%, reflecting broader market fears of a slowdown linked to the trade war. Taiwan's benchmark index also took a major hit, dropping 5%, marking the lowest level since mid-January 2024. Meanwhile, South Korea's Kospi lost 1.7%, and the South Korean won fell to a 16-year low, pressured by both tariffs and market concerns over the country's bond market delay. European markets were not spared from the turmoil. Europe's major indexes continued their decline after China announced an increase in retaliatory tariffs on US imports to 84% starting April 10th, up from 34%. The French CAC 40 dropped 3.7%. Germany's DAX fell by 3.6%, and the FTSE 100 decreased by 3.1%. The Pan-European STOXX 600 dropped 3.9% by 11:51 GMT as the previous session's rally lost momentum. Additionally, the UK saw 30-year government bond yields surge to their highest level since 1998, following the sharp rise in US Treasury yields. European pharmaceutical stocks were among the hardest hit, falling 4.6% after Trump reiterated plans for a broad tariff on all pharmaceutical imports. Major drug makers, including Roche, Novartis, and Novo Nordisk, saw their stocks fall by 5.5% to 5.9% as concerns grew over the impact of tariffs on European exports to the US, which totaled about 90 billion euros in 2023. The ongoing turmoil in global stock markets, fueled by US tariffs and retaliatory actions, is contributing to heightened uncertainty and market volatility.
With the global tariff turmoil, national leaders are warning of crises. Countries like South Korea, Japan, Canada, and Venezuela are scrambling to defend their economies.
South Korea's trade minister is in Washington to seek relief from 25% blanket tariffs imposed by the US on Korean goods, particularly cars and electronics. In response, Seoul has announced emergency support measures, including funding for automakers, tax cuts and subsidies to cushion the blow. Japan is also mobilizing. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba described the situation as a national crisis, calling for national unity. The Japanese government has established over 1,000 consultation desks at financial institutions across the country to help businesses manage the fallout from tariffs.
Failure to take countermeasures will lead to a decline in sales and shrinking profit margins. Even if companies lower prices to offset the tariffs, sales are still likely to drop. A downturn in manufacturing sales will undoubtedly have a negative impact on the Japanese economy.
Canada is hitting back too. Starting today, vehicles entering from the US face a 25% tariff, the Canadian Finance Department confirmed. These measures will remain until the US drops its tariffs on Canadian auto exports. In Latin America, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has signed an economic emergency decree citing the impact of tariffs and cancelled trade licenses. The measure awaits approval by the National Assembly. According to the experts, due to Trump's tariffs geopolitical scenario, countries are looking for new partners.
Everybody, including China and the EU, are looking for new partners or looking for strengthening relationships with partners besides the US, since the US is becoming a more hostile trade partner. And of course, since China and the EU are two of the main biggest economies in the world, they look to each other for increasing their economic links.
US President Donald Trump's higher tariffs on about 60 countries importing to America have already come into effect.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that nobody wins with a trade war. He aired his concerns over tariffs that he says could badly affect vulnerable developing countries.
Trade wars are extremely negative. Nobody wins with a trade war. Everybody tends to lose. And I'm particularly worried with the most vulnerable developing countries in which the impact will be more devastating. I sincerely hope that we will have no recession, because a recession will have dramatic consequences, especially for the poorest people in the world.
The roof collapse at the Jet Set nightclub in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, has claimed at least 124 lives, with more than 150 people injured. Rescue crews saved more than 150 people within the first 24 hours, but progress has slowed since. Efforts are still ongoing. The cause of the collapse remains unknown, as officials are saying it is too early to call. The club was popular among local celebrities, many of whom died in the incident. Ukraine's military chief, Alexander Syrsky, says that Russia has launched a new offensive on the northeast of the country. In an interview for Ukrainian LB, Syrsky noted that a large increase in assaults was already being observed. He supported claims of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who had earlier warned that Russia was preparing an offensive on the two regions of Kharkiv and Sumy, saying the offensive has already begun.
На 95% території Ірпеня знаходиться під нашим контролем.
Over in Germany, the Conservatives and the Social Democrats reached a coalition agreement with Christian Democratic Union's Friedrich Merz set to become the next chancellor. Presenting the policies of the future government in Berlin, Merz said that Germany will shape the world amid turbulences caused by US President Donald Trump. Saying that Europe can count on Germany, he announced that the coalition would reform and invest to keep the country stable, make it safer and economically stronger.
In dieser Woche haben Entscheidungen der amerikanischen Regierungen
just this week, decisions by the U.S. administration caused new turbulences. We can actually watch the reactions in real time. We do not yet know what direction the international situation will head. But that's why our message today is all the more clear. We want to and we will help shape the shift in the world for Germany.
für Deutschland mitgestalten.
Iran is ready to engage with the U.S. at talks on Saturday over its nuclear program with a view to seal a deal, according to its foreign minister Abbas Araghchi. Tehran has emphasized that progress depends on Washington dropping the threat of military action. Iranian officials say discussions will be indirect, despite Donald Trump's earlier claims of direct talks. Iran insists it will not tolerate pressure in negotiations. This comes after Trump's warnings of severe consequences if talks fail. On the US-Iran nuclear talks, we earlier spoke to Turaj Shiralilu, a political analyst from Tehran. Here's what he had to say.
In the runoff to the upcoming negotiations between Iran and the United States, which is slated to be held on Saturday in Sultanate of Oman, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has stressed that these talks will be held indirectly and not directly as announced by US President Donald Trump on Monday. In the last 24 hours, Mr. Araghchi has used a number of media to announce Iran's position for the upcoming negotiations through X, through an op-ed in the Washington Post daily, as well as in meeting with reporters. Basically, he has stressed that the talks will be indirectly, that Iran is ready to use diplomacy, but if it has no other choice, it is ready to show that it is also ready to defend itself, and also stating that the ball is in the US court now that they are going to these negotiations after some 2 years. And again, Mr. Araghchi, who is now touring Algeria on a bilateral visit, told local reporters that if the US side comes to these talks with a clear and genuine intention, then the talks will be conclusive and lead to positive results.
Azerbaijan has always supported, supports, and will continue to support Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, said Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. Speaking during a Q&A session at the ADA University Policy Forum in Baku, Aliyev said that no country would agree to compromise on its territorial integrity and that expecting Ukraine to sacrifice its territory in exchange for peace wouldn't be fair or realistic.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for hosting us. Congratulations again on both the liberation of the territories and on the reconstruction that we saw yesterday. I'm Omar Ashur from the Doha Institute in Qatar, but also in the University of Exeter in the UK. My question is about Ukraine. What is the Azerbaijani position vis-à-vis the Russian war on Ukraine? Now, the situation or the war has been going on now almost 12 years, and it is affecting both the global and the regional environment, including the Caucasus, Europe, and the Middle East, and even the Indo-Pacific area. As a president of a country that has major military achievements and diplomatic achievements, how do you envision the end of this war? Thank you.
First, on our position on the war between Russia and Ukraine, we always support and will continue to support Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. And as a country which suffered from occupation and deterioration of our territorial integrity, we, of course, fully understand this situation. So everyone whom you may ask will say that we want war to stop immediately. Yes, we also want. But the main question is how, and whether this ceasefire, potential ceasefire, or how to say, temporary ceasefire will be sustainable or not. As a country which had 2 wars, active wars, and period in between, I can tell you that ceasefire never stops war, never. And it didn't stop in our case. It's just a temporary relief for countries to regroup, to mobilize, and to start again. Second, what ceasefire means. It's also important because these terms are very important for those who want to help the war to stop, to clearly understand what we are talking about. Everybody will say, I want war to stop. Yes, let's applaud. So what? What does it mean, the stop? Does it mean that there'll be no artillery, there'll be no air bombs, there'll be no sniper war, there'll be no sabotage group? What it will mean? Line of contact between Russia and Ukrainian troops is much longer than ours. Yes, it is different terrain. In our case, the line of contact was very advantageous for Armenia because they had a nature landscape which protected them and actually helped to keep occupation. Plus, during the ceasefire period for 26 years, they built sometimes 5, sometimes 6, sometimes even more lines of engineering lines. Trenches, barbed wire, minefields. So we have, every week, we have casualties on mines, almost 400 people, more than 70 of them killed, and others became severely wounded. So when people talk about ceasefire in Ukraine or peace in Ukraine, do they understand how difficult it will be to control the troops? And what is the level of discipline in Ukrainian army and Russian army? I don't know. Maybe I know, but I don't want to comment. The level of discipline of Azerbaijani army is well known. We stopped on the outskirts of Hankendi by one order of commander-in-chief. So will that line of contact be safe and secure? Will those who want to mediate demand international peacekeepers on that line of contact, as they demanded it from us? Throughout the years of occupation, one of the consolidated messages of United States, Russia, and France was to bring so-called peacekeepers on the line of contact. So what it meant? It meant that they wanted us to agree for occupation. If peacekeeper comes to the line of contact, which is occupied, that means that you should say goodbye to your territory. And no country, at least in my understanding, will agree to compromise on territorial integrity. And to expect Ukraine to agree that they will sacrifice the international recognized territory in exchange of peace, I think is not fair and is not realistic. Because one thing is to say good things, let's stop the war. And the second thing is to go a little bit deeper and maybe to ask those who had the war recently, and what kind of arrangements it needs to create a sustainable peace. Since 1994 May, when we had a ceasefire with Armenia, the war never stopped. There have been different clashes. There was April 2016, when we demonstrated Armenians that they should leave the territories. We didn't want to enter in a large-scale military operation. That's why it lasted only 3 days. But we demonstrated them that we can liberate territories, and we liberated territories. Small, but they did not take that lesson. And then there were several more. The sniper war never stopped throughout 26 years. And even now, you can see that a lot of shootings on our border coming from Armenia. And if ours shoot, they shoot only in response. Discipline in Armenian army is very low. They recruited people who never served, or maybe served 30 years ago in army, civilians, these so-called paramilitary groups, veteran groups, and people who do not serve in the regular army because of lack of human resources in Armenia. So all these questions, of course, it's a big topic, so we can talk hours about that. But without addressing this core issue, it will not work. Me personally, being a realist, I do not see in the foreseeable future any prospect for peace between Ukraine and Russia. Russia declared occupied territories as part of Russia. How they can step back from that? Ukraine considers as the whole world these occupied territories as part of Ukraine. And Azerbaijan considers them as part of Ukraine. How can they sacrifice and say, no, it's not part of Ukraine? Well, if it happens, then it means that I do not understand something in international politics. And unfortunately, wars end when there is a final capitulation act. As our friend mentioned from Croatia, they liberated their territory, came to their border, and stopped. And we did the same. We came to our border and stopped. That's how the wars end. This is real world.
During the policy forum in Baku, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev also spoke on Israel and Turkey, saying that during the previous crisis between the two countries, Baku was involved as a mediator behind closed doors. With the new crisis brewing between Ankara and Tel Aviv, Azerbaijan is apparently again trying to mediate. Joining us to briefly talk on this is Hay Eytan Cohen Yanarojak, a scholar of Turkish studies from Tel Aviv. Welcome. Let's just delve into it. What would you say on Baku mediating between the two sides now with the current relationship that's strained over Syria, Gaza, but other issues as well?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. I would like to mention that I think Azerbaijan's role is very crucial. We in Israel really appreciate Azerbaijan's constructive approach. We also are aware that Azerbaijan has a very important and unique relationship with Turkey, and also given the common history between the Jewish people and Azerbaijani people, I also see that this close relationship is also cherished in Azerbaijan between Israel and Azerbaijan. And therefore, Azerbaijani decision makers, from our perspective, are doing the right thing. They are trying to mend the fences between Jerusalem and Ankara. And this is what the realpolitik should dictate. At the end, these three states should unite together. And before the war, October the 7th, we were talking.
Well, we seem to have lost our connection, but in any case, we heard the main message. Are you still with us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead, finish your thought, please.
What I wanted to say again, that in Israel, we really appreciate Azerbaijan's constructive approach. I also would like to highlight that before this war in the Gaza Strip, which was provoked by Hamas, we were talking about a trilateral alliance project between Israel, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. We were focusing on the common interests of these three countries. So the only winner of this friction between Israel and Turkey is definitely Iran. I mean, this is very obvious, and this war in the Gaza Strip was perpetrated by Iran. So the decision makers in Ankara also should see this very important fact. At the end, Israel and Turkey never fought against each other. These two countries never declared hostilities each other, and therefore, under the umbrella of Azerbaijan, these two states should mend their fences as soon as possible, because the conflict between the two nations is not going to contribute to anything concrete. It would be devastating also for Israel, but it would be also devastating for Turkey. Nobody will win from this. And therefore, Azerbaijan arises here as a key actor. And recently we also witnessed Azerbaijan's penetration into the Israeli economy with Sokar's latest investment in the Israeli gas. Maybe thanks to this investment, also Turkey may be included in this venture, and we may once again create an interdependency between the countries. We really appreciate Azerbaijan's position. We value our relationship with Baku. And thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Azerbaijani Defense Ministry has stated that Azerbaijani army positions came under intermittent fire from the Basar-Kechar direction on the evening of April 8th. According to the statement, between 7:20 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., units of the Armenian armed forces stationed near the Garaiman and Yukari Shorja settlements in the Basar-Kechar district opened fire using small arms. The ministry says that Azerbaijan army units took adequate retaliatory measures and that the situation is now under control. The UN has urged the Trump administration to reconsider its recent cuts to humanitarian aid, warning that such reductions could amount to a death sentence for millions of people in desperate need. Afghanistan, which is already grappling with a severe humanitarian crisis, is expected to be among the hardest hit by these cuts. Tamim Bahiz brings more from Kabul.
The Trump administration has cut funding to the World Food Programme's emergency operations, which support millions of people in impoverished countries around the world, including Afghanistan. In a social media post, the WFP, the world's largest provider of food aid, urged the United States to reverse the decision, warning that cuts could amount to a death sentence for millions facing extreme hunger and starvation. Afghanistan is currently grappling with a severe humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations, nearly 23 million people in the country will require humanitarian assistance this year. WFP Acting Country Director Mutinta Chimuka has stressed that Afghanistan is currently experiencing the worst child malnutrition crisis in its history. This year alone, 3.5 million children are expected to suffer from malnutrition. Every 10 seconds, another child is affected. Even the mothers tasked with nourishing the next generation are themselves malnourished. The Associated Press reports that current and former USAID officials and partners say around $560 million in humanitarian aid to Afghanistan has been cut. The funding loss has impacted vital services, including emergency food aid, care for severely malnourished infants, essential medical treatment, clean drinking water, and urgent mental health support for survivors of physical violence. While the de facto Afghan authorities have yet to comment on the recent cuts, this comes at a time when the need on the ground are growing, and the world's most vulnerable face an increasingly uncertain future. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to A News.